Yo, what is up, my friends? Welcome back into the podcast. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. Guys, today I'm going to be giving you 10 players that you need to stash on your bench to add optimal depth to your roster to help you win in the fantasy playoffs and win your fantasy championship. Guys, this is very important to do. Most people don't start bolstering their roster early enough, and then they're scrambling to get a great team together for the playoffs by the time they make the playoffs, and then they're just kind of limping their way into the fantasy playoffs because they were so focused on the regular season and they weren't preparing ahead of time. And this is not how you win a fantasy championship, guys. You've got to start preparing for the fantasy playoffs and championship now. And I'm going to give you the optimal stash plays to add great depth to your roster for the fantasy playoffs and championship. And I'm going to get right into it, guys. But if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button below. If you do enjoy my content today, make sure to give me a thumbs up, as likes help my channel tremendously. All right, guys, I'm going to get right into my first player. But just to let you know, this really applies to teams that are 5-3 or better, okay? If you're 4-4 or worse, you really need to focus on adding players to your roster that help you win immediately, right? Because you need to start winning now. If you don't start winning now, you might not even make the playoffs. So you've got to focus on making the playoffs. If you're 4-4 or worse, look for players that are going to help you immediately. But for guys that are 5-3 or better, this video applies to you because you need to start bolstering your roster, as it is a very good likelihood that you are going to make the fantasy playoffs. So it's time to start putting together a great team, all right? I am going to start with my first player, and that is Tyler Lockett. Okay, guys, Tyler Lockett is one of the best stash plays in all of fantasy football right now because, look, we know how good this guy is when Russell Wilson comes back. Russell Wilson is coming back very soon, and you can easily trade for Tyler Lockett. If any players in your league are desperate for wins immediately and they have Tyler Lockett on their team, they are ready and willing to give up Tyler Lockett because he offers them pretty much no immediate value. Obviously, he had a really good game this past week with Geno Smith. He had 12 receptions and 144 yards. But over the past 6 weeks, this dude has put up a complete dud in every single game except for his past game. So he really just doesn't offer a whole lot of immediate value. But he has a massive value from a season-long standpoint because once Russell Wilson comes back, this is one of the best deep ball connections from a quarterback and a wide receiver in all of fantasy football. And we know how good Tyler Lockett can be with Russell Wilson. So if you can get your hands on Tyler Lockett, do it. If he's already on your team, don't even consider trading him. Stash him for the fantasy playoffs. Next on my list is going to be J.D. McKissic, guys. J.D. McKissic is another very good stash play. Look, this dude's literally challenging Antonio Gibson for pretty much being the number one running back for fantasy purposes on the team because the Washington football team is almost always playing from behind. And when they play from behind, what do? They pass the ball to J.D. McKissic. Okay, because he's a pass-catching running back. He's one of the best pass-catching running backs in all of fantasy football, although people don't give him credit for it. Look, this is a very good pass-catching running back, considering the fact that the Washington football team is almost always playing from behind. J.D. McKissic might very well be the more valuable fantasy running back than Antonio Gibson. He's a very viable flex option. And added to that, look, Antonio Gibson is pretty much chronically injured at this point. I think it's a very high likelihood that he re-injures himself and ends up being completely out for the season at some point. And at that point, you have a potential running back one in J.D. McKissic. And right now, you can get him for next to nothing because people don't see a whole lot of value in him. But he's very valuable, guys. Get your hands on him if you have the chance. If you have him on your team, don't even think about trading him. Stash J.D. McKissic for the playoffs. Next on my list is going to be Kareem Hunt, guys. Kareem Hunt is probably the single best stash in all of fantasy football right now. We know how good this guy is when he is actually on the field. We don't know when he's going to be back. So if anybody in your fantasy league has Kareem Hunt on their team and they're in need of immediate wins, they will get rid of him in a heartbeat because he offers them no value for probably like the next month or so because he's going to be out for a while. But right in time for the fantasy playoffs is probably when Kareem Hunt is going to be back, so it's perfect timing. So if you have a winning record, guys, get this guy on your team and stash him on your bench. Next on my list is going to be George Kittle, guys. George Kittle is such a fantasy monster, and people are just kind of forgetting about him. And it's crazy, guys. We know how good this guy can be. The San Francisco 49ers need playmakers right now. They are force-feeding the ball to Deebo Samuel because that's really the only way they've been able to move the ball in recent games. And they can't keep doing that because teams are going to start double-teaming Deebo Samuel if they know that he's going to be getting 10, 12, 13 targets a game. So they're going to need another target as far as a pass catcher. And when George Kittle comes back, he is going to be the target. We know that Brandon Ayuk really isn't going to be targeted heavily in this offense. But when George Kittle comes back, he's going to be an absolute volume hog. He's going to be getting 8+ targets a game at the tight end position. He can end up being one of the biggest difference makers in all of fantasy football once he comes back from his injury. And right now, you can get him for next to nothing, guys. So stash George Kittle on your bench. Next on my list is going to be Tony Pollard. Guys, Tony Pollard is awesome. He is one of the most efficient running backs in all of football from a yards per carry standpoint. He's running behind a great offensive line. He's in an explosive offense. And considering the fact that he's starting to touch the ball more and more as the season goes on, his touchdown numbers should regress in a positive direction. He's only gotten in the end zone once this year. I see that changing significantly in the second half of the season. Guys, this Cowboys offense is for real, and any explosive playmaker on the Cowboys offense offers immense fantasy value because they all have very good touchdown upside. Guys, so freaking stash Tony Pollard on your bench. This guy's going to be a beast. Next on my list is going to be Michael Gallup, Tony Pollard's teammate. Look, Michael Gallup in the 2020 season was one of the most heavily targeted pass catchers on the team. And as far as yards per attempt on his receptions, he was targeted more on big plays than Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. So they love to throw this guy the ball down the field. He's got massive big playability in what's a very good Cowboys offense. And once he comes back from his injury, he offers immense fantasy value. And right now you can get him for absolutely dirt cheap. So get Michael Gallup on your roster and stash him for the fantasy playoffs. If you already have him on your team, you better not trade him. Just keep him. All right, guys. Next on my list is going to be A.J. Dillon, guys. A.J. Dillon is a sleeping giant as far as fantasy. Look, he outcarried Aaron Jones this past week. This dude is literally starting to split carries right down the middle with Aaron Jones. It's not a complete 50-50 split as far as overall touches because Aaron Jones gets all the passing work and more red zone usage. But the fact that A.J. Dillon is starting to get just as many carries per game as Aaron Jones, and what's a very, very good Packers offense that's on fire and unstoppable right now, his touchdown upside is there, and he offers immense fantasy value. You can get him for next to nothing because people still don't see value in A.J. Dillon because all they see him as is a backup running back to Aaron Jones. But, guys, this guy's splitting freaking carries with Aaron Jones and a great offense. Get him on your team and stash him for the fantasy playoffs. Next on my list is going to be Julio Jones, guys. Julio Jones has massive league-winning upside, guys, especially with Derrick Henry being hurt. This team is going to take a 180-degree turnaround from being a run-first team to being a pass-first team. They have two super elite receiving options in A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Once Julio Jones comes back from his injury, he's going to be an absolute target hog now that this is a pass-first team. And there's no reason that he can't have weeks where he outperforms A.J. Brown massively. All the defenses are going to be focused on A.J. Brown. And we've seen how good Julio Jones is, guys. We know how good of a receiver this dude is. Don't worry about the fact that he's a little bit older now. He's still got plenty of tread on the tires. And he offers immense fantasy value when he comes back. And right now you could get him for dirt cheap. So stash Julio Jones for the fantasy playoffs. Next on my list is going to be Alexander Madison, guys. Alexander Madison is a very good stash. And I'll tell you why. Guys, how often is Dalvin Cook actually available for the fantasy playoffs? Ask yourself that. This dude is almost always injured by the end of the season because they use him too freaking much. I mean, they literally give this dude 90+% of the carries for the team, which is, it's really stupid when you think about it, considering the fact that Madison could come in and get you almost Dalvin Cook-like production on a week-to-week basis, and they should be splitting carries between the two to keep Dalvin Cook healthy. However, they don't do that. They abuse Dalvin Cook. They give him way too much volume, and he's almost always hurt by the fantasy playoffs. I would say that there's a 50 to 60% chance that Dalvin Cook is injured going into the fantasy playoffs, and Alexander Madison is a beast running back one once he takes over the lead role. So stash him on your bench because there's a very high likelihood that Dalvin Cook gets hurt like he always does, and then you have a running back one in Alexander Madison. Okay, guys, last on my list is going to be Clyde EdwardsHelaire. Guys, players in your league that are in need of immediate wins will definitely deal Clyde EdwardsHelaire right now because they need wins immediately. And, he might be coming back this next week, but he might not, especially if we figure out that he's not coming back this next week. Get your hands on him while you have the chance, because if you wait even one more week on Clyde EdwardsHelaire, odds are he's coming back and people aren't going to trade him. So take advantage of the desperation of the losing players in your league and grab Clyde EdwardsHelaire off their roster in the trade market and add him to your bench as a stash for the fantasy playoffs, because we know that he could be a low-end running back one once he's back and healthy. All right, guys, those are my stash plays. It's definitely the stash season and the season to start bolstering your roster for the fantasy playoffs. So make sure to add these players to your roster. while you have the chance. And if they're already on your roster, just keep them, guys. Don't trade them. They're great stash plays. All right, guys. I appreciate you tuning into the video today. I hope this video helped, and I will catch you guys later.